Our next speaker is Dr. Tim Condon. You already heard Dr. Lovett refer to his budget. The point of fact is that the National Institute on Drug Abuse funds about 85% of all the addiction research done on the planet Earth. The addiction research program within NIDA is quite broad, ranging from basic science of the addiction in the neurotransmitter systems, genetics, all the way through to the other end, long-term recovery. And so I'm very interested to see what Dr. Condon is going to be talking about, and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I actually came to this meeting today to listen, and it's not very often that I actually spend an entire day at a conference, because I do a lot of public speaking, and it's usually fly in, drop your payload, move on to the next conference, give a talk, and this has just been such a wonderful day for me to experience and hear all of the perspectives and all of the talks today. And I want to thank Mike and his team for putting this together, and thank you for inviting me to come and participate. But I don't have all the answers for the science of recovery or the agenda. And obviously from Dr. Laudett's talk, we know that we don't have the answers. We have lots of questions. And I agreed with absolutely everything she said. Well, 98%. She got me an earmark. So one of the things that I have heard, I wouldn't say a lot just in the last year, but probably in the last 5 years, is NIDA doesn't do research on recovery. And I heard it the first couple of times, and I went, well, what does that mean? What is recovery? And obviously, we're all struggling with that and come up with a definition. And that was usually my response: what is recovery? And I'm delighted that a conference like this, but also the activities that have been going on, the one that Tom led and the others, to really try to codify what that means, what is recovery. Because if you're going to do a scientific study on what is recovery, you better have a definition of what it is you're measuring first. Because that's what the peer review system at the National Institutes of Health expects, and that is the standard. So I'm delighted that in fact, the agenda is moving forward. Let's see here. I'm sorry Dr. Clark is not here, but I wanted to talk a little bit. Now, I'm a neuroscientist by training, so about 18 years ago now, it's hard to believe, it's been that long, I went to work at an agency, some of you may remember, called Atomon. And I was in the office of the administrator, with some grand poobah title. And I remember going to my first meeting with treatment providers and people in recovery. And Tom, I'm going to paraphrase this, but you'll see that I've been influenced by you in my recollection of what was actually said there. Let me move forward here. We don't need no stinking research. We already know what works. Just give us the money. And as a researcher, I really did double take. So you can imagine, as I'm sitting here today, the entire day, and of course, it's been a number of years now, but today, the appreciation of all the speakers about the fact that we actually need a research agenda on recovery. We need research. It is the gold standard. It's something we need to do. Exactly how to implement that and what the outcomes are and what the definitions are things we don't have the answers to. But research is no longer, and I see Linda Kaplan back there. Linda, I remember when I first came and met with the NADAC people, and research was a 4-letter word. And I think the whole field has come a long way. And I think it has a lot to do, not only with the research that's been done, because I spent a lot of my time on the road disseminating that research, but also the translation of that research into something that people can use and hold on to and wrap their minds around. So I remember these days, So what have we learned? Well, I'm sorry that Dr. Clark isn't here because one of the things that we have learned, and this is the science of addiction, is that prolonged drug use does change the brain in fundamental and long-lasting ways. In animal studies, we have learned a lot about how drugs of abuse actually change the neurocircuitry, how drugs of abuse actually change the brain morphology. And this isn't just interesting science. This is important for treatment. It's important for recovery. It's actually important for policymakers and people who don't believe that this is a disease to understand that, yes, it's not just a moral failing. Of course, if it was a moral failing, we'd be doing research on moral failings, but that's a different thing. So this is a study just in animals looking at the difference in long-term cocaine use in animals and looking at the change of what we call the dendritic spines. Here, and they're different. And so what does that mean? Well, in the life of an animal, it doesn't necessarily mean that much, but this is where I wish Dr. Clark was here. Here is a PET scan, Dr. Clark. I'm so sorry you're not here to see the fruits of all those dollars that went into PET scans. This isn't just interesting research. I'm telling you, showing these slides, and I might be a little prejudiced, but when I go out and show these slides to people, I get their attention. Policymakers, I do a lot of, and Melody Heaps knows, I do a lot of judicial work in the criminal justice system and a lot of judicial training. They pay attention to this one. They go, what is this? And so this is a PET scan, and it is interesting research too. This is from Nora Volkoff, who's the director of NIDA, and this is looking at just metabolic activity. This is a normal individual on the top, and this is looking at 3 cuts through the brain, and yellow and red are more metabolic activity. This is a cocaine addict 10 days after their last cocaine. You can see that there's a dramatic difference between the normal control. And this is that individual 100 days after their last cocaine. Same individual. So you can see that it's changed, it's starting to come back. Well, this is part of the process of recovery, from my perspective. This is the process of abstinence, what's going on. This is what people experience. So it's not just interesting science, it does have implications for what we're all talking about here. It's the basis of where we need to go. I call it the continuum of research. And I've got another couple of examples here. This is looking at dopamine receptors, which is one of the major neurotransmitters involved in drug addiction. In cocaine, the same paradigm. The kidney-shaped area is the striatum. This is a normal control. This is a cocaine abuser 1 month after his last cocaine. And this is that same individual. In the same individual, 4 months. Long-lasting fundamental change in this dopamine system. Do we know exactly what that means? No, but we do know that there's a difference and there's a change. And we believe that that's the basis of the difference in behavior. A lot of it is, we believe, that the root of the compulsive behavior that results when people become addicted. So I get asked this question all the time. I'll show these great PET scans, other kinds of brain scans. Prolonged drug use changes the brain in long-lasting and fundamental ways, and there are changes in cognitive functioning. Well, any of you who work with people who are addicted in treatment programs, you know that there often are cognitive issues related to people presenting in treatment. Is there recovery? Well, you all answered that today, and I always say this in my talks. Of course there's recovery. People recover every day from their drug addiction. Thousands and thousands of people. And now we actually have national organizations of people, finally, national organizations of people in recovery who are speaking up and standing up and being recognized for this. And do we have research on this? Not a lot. And Tom McClellan asked me earlier, and I said, well, I'm going to show you the body of research using PET scans on recovery. And this is it, as far as I can tell. This is also work by Nora Volkoff. This is Looking at a normal control, this is looking at something called the dopamine transporter molecule. This is a methamphetamine user 1 month after his last methamphetamine. Dramatic difference between the normal control and the method user. This is that same individual who's been abstinent for 24 months, 2 years in recovery, had treatment, and you can see that this individual, this is much closer to this than it was. And I'll tell you, everybody goes ooh and ah and goes, 2 years. Wow, that's really important. And I tell the story of working with Melody Heaps in Chicago. One day we're sitting there talking with some of the judges, and I think one of the judges says, well, you know, down in Springfield, in the Capitol, one physician got up and said it took 6 years to recover from methamphetamine addiction. So it takes 6 years in Southern Illinois. It takes 2 years in Long Island. We don't know. Everybody's different. Everybody's, as you heard today, path to recovery is different. We don't actually know, but we do know that there is a change in the biological markers. And it's not just interesting science, it has some implications for treatment, for cognitive function, for engagement in treatment, for wellness, for life satisfaction. Because if those neurotransmitters and that circuitry are in fact disrupted, you can't expect all of that. In addiction, even after long periods of abstinence, relapse is common. It's a normal part of long-term recovery, and I believe this. 4 major neurobiological processes: conditioning, cueing, drug priming, stress-induced. We just heard Dr. Laudette talked about stress, eroded frontal lobe, inhibitory control, and I'm not going to get into all the neuroscience there, but here again is some basic science, basic neuroscience that's not very old, a couple years old, looking at something called the incubation period after prolonged abstinence. Relapse can be provoked by re-exposure to cocaine-associated cues that also induce drug craving. Well, you know that from your clinical experience or from your personal experience. Based on anecdotal evidence, suggested that cue-induced cocaine craving increases over the first several weeks of abstinence and then remains high over an extended period of time. Is it the same right after? Does it change? What's going on in the brain? And that's where this phenomenon we call incubation has actually been studied in animal studies and is really important in terms of how we can apply this to the clinical arena. So using this animal model, a number of investigators, and these are some investigators in our own research laboratories in Baltimore, have looked at this incubation. And really the bottom line is this, is that after withdrawal, and this is in animal studies, this is lever pressing increases. You can see in 60 days is a long time in a rat's life. After 60 days, it continues to go up. But over studying it longer, and quite frankly, that's why this is your point in terms of the human studies, is we don't have longitudinal data, or very little of it. But you can see that it actually goes down. So how long do we have to have people in treatment? Well, you can't extrapolate from the animal data to the human. And we always run into trouble when we do that. But this gives us some insight if we say, well, what's going on here in the brains of these individual animals during this incubation period? The bottom line is we actually can study this. I think we'll skip over this one. And we can actually figure out that the incubation, that there are changes in various nuclei, in protein products that are associated with and produced in the amygdala. This is an area of the brain that's very involved in emotional memory. They actually change over this period of time. And that, at least in these animal models, is driving the animal's behavior. So is this important in humans? Well, I'll tell you, we know down at the molecular cellular level that there are these changes in animal studies. If you try to apply this to humans, a beautiful study done right here in Philadelphia by Anna Rose Childress at the University of Pennsylvania has taken this kind of information, taken it into her clinic, into her program with cocaine addicts who are in a treatment program, done scans on them, shows them videos, actually in this case they're subliminal videos of cocaine paraphernalia, cues, sees that those cues, those video cues actually excite, increase the activity, in the amygdala of the brain. And in her particular study, this has been published now, if she pre-treats them with a medication called baclofen, she finds that she can block that activation in the amygdala. So I would maintain that this is a very important basic science finding translated to the clinic that may have great implications for both treatment as well as long-term recovery, if you in fact can remove craving-induced. Bill, you mentioned 90 days this morning. One of the principles of drug addiction treatment from our booklet, 90 days. Well, here's another one. People, places, and things. So, it only took us about 65 years to come up with the neuroscience. But Bill W. said this about 66, 67 years ago. Stay away from the people, places, and things. But this is important for us to understand what is going on, what is the mechanism. And I think this is going to be very important also as we translate this farther out into long-term recovery. So what about other aspects of recovery? Well, we do have a couple longitudinal studies. One at Chestnut Health Systems, led by Mike Dennis and Christy Scott, and at UCLA, led by Ying Sher and Doug Aglin. And I'm just going to show you a little bit of data there. Longitudinal trends in recovery, 1 to 2 months. This is sustaining abstinence through year 8, 1 to 12 months, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and 5 years. You can see that it takes a year of abstinence in this population before, in fact, half the people relapse. And so we are only now starting to have some data related to long-term. These are very expensive long-term studies. I had one person once come to me and say, actually went to one of their congressmen and said, you know, you really need to give us a 20-year grant so we can study this for 20 years. Well, the system doesn't respond very well to that. That would be putting it kindly. After 5 years, if you are sober, you probably will stay that way, 86% in this study. So we do have some data. And Dr. Ledette was mentioning 3 years in some of the others. This is actually the CAP study from UCLA, looking at long-term, I believe this is long-term heroin users, if I'm not mistaken. And in fact, under 1 year, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 5 years of abstinence, 75%, 72%, 15 years. After 5 years, if you are sober, you probably will stay so. Well, this is data. Data, data, data. I said to this gentleman here, we were talking, he said, data, data, data. You gave great data this morning. That's what's going to be needed to change the system, to convince the people who have the money strings, the people who are in charge. Data, data, data. Not, we know what works. Just give us the money. We really do need data. And I'm very supportive of a long-term recovery research agenda. Among those seeking treatment within their first decade use, nearly all are in recovery within 30 years. So I'm going to say that I've taken some of these slides from some really smart people at NIDA who've been thinking a lot about this. And they include Tom Hilton, Radonna Chandler, Bennett Fletcher, and Akiva Letterman. These are all people in our services research group. And these very talented scientists have been thinking about these problems for a while. And in the last 2 weeks, in my preparation, trying to say, well, what do we know? And discussing with them, these are some of the data that we've come up with. So I think this was is in the Journal of Substance Use Treatment from 2005. And it shows the readmission curves, the relapse cycles, the cumulative recovery success. And I think it's really now beginning, because of the data, the very little data that's already been out there, giving us an insight as to what long-term recovery might be and what are some of the additional questions we need to ask. So, sustaining abstinence, what can NIDA do to extend follow-up research to examine treatment effects and achieving recovery? What is the best approach for integrating services research with neurocognitive effects, long-term effects, gene environment questions, systems research? All of these are very important research questions. I agree with Dr. Laudette's assessment and very specific questions that need to be answered in a very scientifically rigorous way. Willing to view addiction from a recovery perspective more will move the field forward. Couldn't agree with that more. NIDA, on the other hand, will continue to look for these opportunities to encourage researchers to go beyond just studying treatment effectiveness, but also the recovery process. You know, the people who quit on their own, the people who don't go to treatment, from a scientific point of view, those are the most interesting people. And nobody studies them. Nobody studies, you know, we have studies looking at the dopamine receptors and all those different things, and there's always 2 or 3 outliers here. Boy, those are really interesting subjects to go study. But that's, you know, that's not something that most researchers do. That is encouraging principal investigators to explore clinically meaningful links between human brain recovery and addiction recovery. And NIDA-CTN and other infrastructure, that's a clinical trial network, may offer a fruitful platform to amass quality data on recovery through longitudinal studies. So, Tom, this is a tribute to you since I'm here in, is this Pittsburgh or Philadelphia? No, it's Philadelphia. Tom, you are one of the gurus in the field, and I took your words and made this slide, and Melanie knows this because I show this to all the judges. If we treat a diabetic, and symptoms don't subside, what do? Would we increase the dose of their medication? Would we change the medication? Would we change treatment approaches? Would we fail to provide ongoing treatment for a diabetic? And the answer in this country, thankfully today, is no, we wouldn't fail to provide ongoing treatment. But we do discriminate in the healthcare system for substance abuse. And I'm the only deputy director of an NIH institute. Goes to a cocktail party. People ask me what I do. I work at NIDA. What's that? Well, that's the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Oh, you know how to solve the drug problem? Let me tell you, my colleague at the Cancer Institute, who's the deputy there, nobody tells them how to solve the melanoma problem. No, it doesn't happen. There's still, the stigma is still alive. Everybody has an opinion how to fix this. I think the research helps inform those who don't understand that this is truly a disease, a chronic relapsing disease. And in fact, research is going to help us figure it out. In treating addiction, we need to keep our eye on the real targets. I just want to say I've been using this slide for about 12 years. It is a little dated, but it seemed very appropriate for today. Abstinence is a gold standard in these research studies, but we always, and we continue, and we do in fact, have more studies looking at the functionality in family, in work, in community. Those are important measures. That's what I'm hearing today also about the agenda for research on long-term recovery. These are important things. So, how do we get the message out? I'll just tell you that I spend a lot of my time, the Institute spends a lot of effort trying to translate this research into useful information for people in recovery, for treatment providers, for the general public, for people who have people with substance use problems in their families, for policymakers. We just educate policymakers. And in fact, I know, Lynetta, you're probably rolling your eyes. You've only seen this 100 times.
Yes.
This has been my slide for a long time. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's around, does it really make a sound? If research is done and only published in peer-reviewed journals, does it really have any impact on the lives of the people that we're here to serve? And the answer is, of course it doesn't. And so we spend a lot of our time and effort in what we call blending research and practice, translating research into user-friendly material. And this involves practitioners, community people, researchers, our colleagues at SAMHSA. We partner with the ATTCs in a large number of projects. And a few things that I just wanted to say were some of the fruits of this over the last, what's this, from 99? Yeah, so the last almost a decade now. This was one of the first principles drug addiction treatment based on research. One that we released 2 years ago in Chicago with great fanfare was Principles of Drug Abuse Treatment for Criminal Justice Populations, because I really think that there's a lot of opportunity there and then you heard a very elegant talk from Melody Heaps today, and I agreed with everything she said. The Science of Addiction, translating this is one of our, actually our biggest seller is this one. And I'll tell you, we were shocked. I'll tell you, there's been over 2 million of these downloaded from our website. We were shocked that many people were interested in this to solve and to have the public health and the public safety issues come together. So this has also been one of our, we released this in combination with the HBO special last year. We're very proud of this. We also have something called the Science of Treatment that we've been working with our colleagues at SAMHSA, and this is something that we will be distributing at the upcoming Night of Lending Conference in Cincinnati on, there you go, in June 1st and 2nd. 1st and 2nd. So, advances in science are bringing us to new understanding of drug abuse and addiction, and this knowledge is allowing us to develop more targeted strategies for prevention and treatment. I wish Karen Carpenter-Colombo was still here, because what I did was, after I heard her this morning, I went back and said, and this is going to be my new slide, and recovery. Thanks so much for your attention.